Mr. Acosta. We'll now begin a round of 5-minute questions, and if senators wish, there will be a second round of five-minute questions. Mr. Acosta, let's start with the skills gap that you spoke about. If we're to think of you, as I think we should, as Secretary of the Workforce, to help workers in this head-spinning environment that we find ourselves in adjust to it and fit into it, we already spend a lot of money on helping people get training. We spend more than $30 billion in Pell Grants. The average Pell Grant is about the same as the average community college tuition. We spend a lot of money on student loans. Other countries do other things. Germany has an apprenticeship system. Some people say our technical institutes do a better job than our community colleges. If you're the Secretary of the Workforce, and if you see that, according to the Manufacturing Institute, 2 million Americans' manufacturing jobs will go unfilled over the next 10 years due to the skills gap. Specifically, what are some of the things we should be doing about it?
Senator, thank you for the question. First, let me touch on the first part of your comments, which are the spending that we spend in education. And I think it's critical, if confirmed, that the Department of Labor work very closely with the Department of Education, because there's a lot of spending that is taking place in education. And we want to make sure, to the extent possible and feasible, that individuals have the opportunity to align their education with the skills the workplace will demand. More specifically, to the second part of your question, you mentioned apprenticeships. So as Dean of a law school, I'm a big fan of learning by doing. We recently started a program which is a full semester internship at a law firm in addition to a public defender's office or a state attorney's office. And the students have the opportunity to spend a full semester there because they can learn by doing. And I think if you look at some of the apprenticeship programs where individuals work and they get credit while they are working, or some of the other programs that are available in community colleges that focus on vocational opportunities in partnership with individual businesses. Those are all options that we should be looking at because they're alternative ways of educating, they're alternative ways of providing skills, and importantly, it is a way for students to acquire skills and jobs, and skills to be used in jobs without taking on the enormous debt that we're seeing in some secondary programs right now.
Let me ask you one other question. The overtime rule. Fortunately, it's not in effect, thanks to a court. In my view, it was one of the worst examples of regulation by the previous administration. It caused millions of Americans to punch time clocks that they didn't want to punch. It raised tuition, according to our universities, by hundreds of dollars per student because of its cost. It caused my local Boy Scout council to have to dismiss counselors. It received widespread condemnation around the country, and even in Congress there was bipartisan opposition. So there was a doubling of the threshold. There was an impact on nonprofits. What are you going to do about the overtime rule?
Well, Senator, Mr. Chairman, as you mentioned, it's pending in litigation. Let me offer a few observations. First, the overtime rule hasn't been updated, I believe, since 2004. And I think it's unfortunate that, that rules that involve dollar values can sometimes go more than a decade, sometimes 15 years, without updating. Because life does become more expensive over time.
But let me press you a little bit. I mean, was what doubling the threshold, applying so heavily the impact of it to nonprofits, doesn't that concern you?
So Mr. Chairman, it does, and the point that I was making is I think it's unfortunate that it goes so long without adjusting, because when they are adjusted, you see impacts such as a doubling of the amount that does create what I'll call a stress on the system, as the chairman mentioned, particularly in areas, both industry and geographic areas, that are lower wage historically. And so I think one of the challenges that we face in addressing the overtime rule is Since 2004, there's been no change. Now there is a very large change. And how should that be addressed as a policy matter, I think is a very difficult decision, but a very serious one, because the economy does feel a substantial impact from such a large change.
Thank you. Senator Murray.
Mr. Chairman, let me follow on that.